So for you to say everybody's on the same page was a complete lie. Now, insert, here's Adam Silver. NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said Tuesday night he is tracking WNBA collective bargaining sessions very closely. I speak for Mark as well. We have been involved with this league for 3 decades. I talked to the people who are at the negotiating.
Adam Silver didn't simply step into the WNBA's collective bargaining talks. He flipped the entire balance of power. This was not a neutral or advisory role. It was a deliberate power move that instantly shifted leverage and intensified pressure on the player's side. The NBA commissioner made his stance crystal clear. The games must continue, and a deal must be reached. That message closely echoes the signal Caitlin Clark sent weeks earlier when she publicly distanced herself from the Players Association. Now, with the most powerful figure in professional basketball reinforcing that same position, the dynamics of the negotiations have fundamentally changed.
Now, insert, here's Adam Silver, and that he and Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum would both be willing to join the prolonged negotiations to finalize.
All of this is unfolding as league leadership scrambles to protect off-season initiatives and preserve the momentum the WNBA has worked hard to build, which is why Adam Silver's involvement carries even greater weight. He isn't simply offering advice. He's sending a clear message that progress will require compromise from both sides. While much of the public discussion continues to focus on player pay and growing acknowledgement that WNBA athletes are undercompensated relative to the league's growth, there's a notable omission. The push for a 50-50 revenue split, a central demand of the Players Association, is largely absent from the conversation. Instead, Silver has steered the dialogue toward flat dollar raises rather than percentage-based revenue sharing, directly challenging the union's core negotiating framework. The timing only intensifies the pressure. Silver made these remarks on December 17th during the NBA Cup Finals in Las Vegas, with the current CBA extension set to expire on January 9th. That leaves less than 3 weeks to close what insiders describe as a significant gap, as players seek roughly 30% of league revenue, while the WNBA is offering closer to 15%. Forcing a high-stakes push toward a middle ground. Silver is clearly advocating, while rejecting how players calculate their share.
Also said he has great relationships with many of the players and believes the sides are on course for a solution. The current 40-day extension ends January 9th, and that date is fastly approaching. Okay, he says, I remain optimistic we'll get something done, but whether that means I'm physically sitting at the table for the negotiation, Silver said. And again, I speak for Mark as well. We have been involved with this league for 3 decades. In essence, I care enormously about it and want it to be successful, and I want the players to feel fairly treated as well. And I realize there's been a disconnect, especially over the last few.
Now consider Breanna Stewart's response, which quietly reveals how much the balance of power has shifted. She acknowledges that the current approach isn't getting players anywhere, an implicit admission that the Players Association's hardline strategy hasn't produced results. After opting out of the CBA in October in hopes of forcing movement on revenue sharing, players have instead endured 2 extensions, watched the league push ahead with expansion plans without their input, and now face the possibility of the NBA commissioner himself stepping into negotiations. Stewart says she would welcome Adam Silver's involvement, but the way she frames it is telling. Her emphasis is on making sure everyone understands what players want and how they feel, language that doesn't come from a position of leverage. It reads more like an appeal for outside pressure, hoping Silver might push ownership to give ground. The issue is that Silver's stance is already clear. He isn't there to mandate a 50-50 revenue split or redesign the league's financial model. His objective is far more pragmatic. Secure a deal that keeps games on the floor and business moving forward. That requires compromise, not a decisive win for either side. For players who built their strategy around firm, non-negotiable demands, this reality changes everything. Stewart even concedes that multiple outcomes can exist and that both sides could still leave satisfied. But in this climate, the negotiating rules have shifted, and the Players Association will need to adapt quickly.
We feel. And now let's get to the actual video so we can get more dialogue of what Breanna Stewart had to say. They trying to hardball. The owners aren't going to give in to all this nonsense. They're trying to hardball. These players are. And at the end of the day, Adam Silver is with Caitlin Clark. Y'all need to compromise and get this damn deal done and stop playing games.
Hey, Stewie. Good to see you. I had two questions. The first, Adam Silver spoke ahead of the Cup and said that if necessary, he'd be up for coming to the bargaining table, him and Mark Tatum. I'm just wondering, like, do you think that would be beneficial? Would there be value to having Adam's presence at the bargaining table?
But she immediately adds that something mutual has to happen first, and that phrasing is telling. For months, the players' union treated revenue sharing as a non-negotiable demand rather than a starting point, framing it publicly as a moral issue rooted in fairness and equity instead of a bargaining tool. They pushed back against the league's emphasis on flat salary increases and refused to seriously engage with percentage-based revenue splits, drawing a hard line in the sand. Now, with compromise openly acknowledged, that line looks far less rigid. When a prominent leader concedes that both sides must give ground, it signals a realignment, pragmatic perhaps, but also a retreat from the firm posture the union presented to players and fans. This shift creates internal tension, especially among those who closely align themselves with the original strategy, and it complicates the position of stars like Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier, whose launch of Unrivaled was meant to expand player leverage and opportunity. As negotiations drag on, questions grow about who actually benefits from the delay. Not every player has the same financial safety net, and not everyone can endure a prolonged standoff. Over time, the gap between leadership rhetoric and on-the-ground reality becomes harder to ignore, and what began as a unified front now risks exposing cracks within the player base. With Adam Silver focused on resolution rather than redistribution, pressure no longer rests solely on ownership. It also falls on the Players Association to reconcile its public demands with what it is truly willing to accept at the bargaining table. That underlying fracture becomes even clearer when Stewart is asked about Project B, the new 3-on-3 league scheduled to run from fall through April, a timeline that directly conflicts with Unrivaled's winter window and reveals more than she likely intends.
The season is going to run from fall to April, which is in direct competition with Unrivaled. What were your immediate thoughts when you heard about Project B? And what's the long-term answer for the landscape of women's basketball? Is it to have one premier league? Is it to continue developing all of these leagues? Like, what is truly the answer? What is the ideal world for the women's basketball landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I think my immediate thoughts when I saw Project B, I was kind of like, well, they saw what worked. You know, they saw the success that we had here at Unrivaled, and they wanted to be a part of that in their own way and try to do it. But at the same time, knowing, what we're doing.
She explains that Project B took lessons from Unrivaled and aimed to carve out its own space within that model. She quickly pivots, however, to emphasizing what makes Unrivaled unique, highlighting player equity, access to resources, and keeping athletes centralized. What's more telling, though, is what she omits. She doesn't acknowledge that Project B's schedule aligns more seamlessly with the WNBA calendar, nor does she point out that players who want to remain overseas while still participating in a full WNBA season now have a practical option. Instead, Project B is dismissed as a copycat, while Unrivaled is framed as a superior approach, a portrayal that reads more like promotion than neutral commentary. This response underscores a tension that has shaped these negotiations from the start. Stewart later notes that if the WNBA season isn't aligned with everything else, nothing functions properly. She insists there must be a consensus, yet simultaneously admits the league hasn't reached that point and makes it clear her primary focus remains on Unrivaled. That contradiction matters. The Players Association is supposed to represent all WNBA players across varying financial situations, career stages, and off-season priorities. Yet some key figures in these talks are running a league that benefits directly from a compressed WNBA season and protected winter months. Those incentives don't perfectly align with the broader player base. For some athletes, a longer WNBA season and flexible off-season options are far more valuable than a concentrated alternative league. When leadership priorities lean toward personal ventures, it complicates the credibility of a union's negotiating stance. Caitlin Clark flagged this issue weeks ago, and as negotiations drag on, the overlap between advocacy and self-interest becomes increasingly hard to ignore. what once appeared as unified leadership.
What we're doing right now isn't really getting us anywhere, so if that means that Adam and Mark need to come to the table, we're more than happy to have that, and just making sure everybody understands what we want and how we feel, and realizing that both things can be true together. You know, everybody can agree and like get what they want out of this, but there has to be some, like, I don't know, mutual, some things in common happening first. So yeah, if Adam wants to come, I would love to have.
She made it clear that players need to compromise because games have to be played, and the implication is hard to miss. Some players appear more focused on protecting their off-season ventures than prioritizing a league that actually pays them. Commissioner Kathy Angelbert insisted the roster was united, but that claim didn't hold up. Players like DJ Kelly and others publicly sided with Caitlin Clark, exposing real divisions within the player base. That internal split is a major reason negotiations have stalled and explains why Adam Silver is stepping in directly. Silver made it clear that he, along with Deputy Commissioner Mark Tatum, is willing to sit in on talks, a significant detail, as Tatum doesn't typically involve himself in routine bargaining. His presence signals that the NBA views this as a genuine business risk. Overseeing league operations and international growth, Tatum usually intervenes only when major deals are at stake, and the league is acting to protect long-term investments. The WNBA has plenty on the line, with historic expansion underway. Golden State joins next season, followed by Toronto and Portland in 2026, alongside new media rights agreements expected to bring in $2.2 billion over 11 years starting in 2025. Any work stoppage now would be damaging, and a prolonged standoff could be catastrophic. At the same time, the league cannot allow unchecked player control over revenue. A 50-50 split would create exactly that scenario for a league still operating at a loss. Silver and Tatum are walking a tightrope. Growth demands stability, and stability requires compromise. The question is whether the Players Association is ready to face that reality or continue pushing demands the league has already rejected. Silver isn't entering talks to debate theoretical options. He is there to enforce a solution. The goal is compromise that keeps the league moving and games on the floor, expected to include meaningful salary raises, better travel standards, expanded player benefits, and possibly revenue sharing tied to profitability benchmarks rather than raw revenue. What will not be part of the deal is the Players Association's demand for 30% of league revenue, regardless of financial reality, a distinction critical to understanding Caitlin Clark's position. She stepped away from union messaging because she understood the numbers and the fragility of the league's current growth. The WNBA is expanding, but not yet financially secure. Momentum relies on consistent seasons, full schedules, and a strong public image. Any disruption, shortened seasons, or public labor conflict threatens that progress. Clark's presence is central this season, with games featuring her averaging roughly 1.2 million viewers, compared to around 400,000 for games without her, highlighting where real leverage lies. Pushing for compromise in this environment isn't selfish. It's grounded in reality. Sustainable growth requires stability, not brinkmanship. Silver consistently emphasizes dollar growth and league success, signaling that players deserve higher pay as revenues rise, but that growth must be managed responsibly. The WNBA generates roughly $200 million annually. 30% of that equals $60 million for 144 players, about $417,000 each before accounting for operating costs, team expenses, expansion, and facilities. Once those factors are included, the math falls apart. Even 15% stretches the current structure. Silver knows this from experience. The NBA faced similar challenges, and the lesson remains: protect growth before redistributing it. The NBA didn't adopt a 50-50 revenue split until it was financially stable and highly profitable. The WNBA, in its 28th season, is only beginning to establish true viability, making demands for NBA-level splits a mismatch between aspiration and reality. The Players Association made this harder by framing negotiations as a moral issue rather than a business one, which limited flexibility and made backing down politically difficult. That framing explains why Angelbert insisted all players were unified even as cracks formed. Once unity fractured, first by Clark and then by others prioritizing a smooth season, leverage weakened. Now Silver is positioned to force both sides to confront economic reality. WNBA players deserve higher pay, and the league cannot sustain revenue-based compensation that ignores profitability. Both are true, and compromise means accepting both. Over the next 3 weeks, the Players Association faces a narrowing set of outcomes. Accept a deal with substantial salary increases, better benefits, and structural improvements without full revenue sharing, or let Silver and Tatum impose a framework neither side loves but both can survive. That is, compromise. Not everyone getting everything they want, but enough to move forward. Breanna Stewart's focus on Unrivaled explains much of the gridlock, as some of the most influential players in negotiations are heavily invested in an off-season league that benefits from a shorter, less flexible WNBA calendar.